Look, we all know the story. A guy named Paul Revere hops on a horse, screams about the British for 5 minutes, and gets a poem that cements him as the ultimate American patriot. But what if I told you a 16-year-old girl rode twice as far, in a massive rainstorm, and actually managed to gather an entire army, instead of just getting captured by a British patrol? Meet Sybil Ludington, the teenage badass who makes Revere look like he was out for a casual Sunday stroll. Grab your boots, because history somehow misplaced the most impressive ride of 1777. Picture this. It's April 26, 1777, and the vibes in Danbury, Connecticut are, to put it mildly, apocalyptic. The town isn't just having a bad day, it's being turned into a giant bonfire by the British. We're talking the Continental Army's entire Don't Die This Winter kit, meat, flour, tents, and medical supplies, all melting into the pavement while the redcoats basically throw a celebratory rager. A messenger manages to escape the chaos and gallops to the Ludington house in New York, looking like he's seen a ghost and smelling like a charcoal grill. He finds Sybil's dad, Colonel Henry Ludington, and drops the news. The British are coming, and they're bringing the matches. The colonel needs his militia like yesterday, but he can't leave his post to go get them. That's when the colonel's teenage daughter, Sybil, looks at her dad, looks at the pitch-black horizon, and decides that waiting for a man to do it is so 1776. She hops on her horse, Star, and heads for the woods, officially launching the most legendary "I'll do it myself" moment in American history. But let's get one thing straight. This wasn't a scenic night ride. While Paul Revere was navigating well-lit streets on a clear night for about 12 to 16 miles, Sybil was looking at a 40-mile trek in the middle of a literal deluge. If you've ever tried to drive a car in a torrential downpour with broken windshield wipers, you have about 5% of the perspective of what Sybil was facing. And her vehicle for this mission? It was a yearling. For the non-equestrians out there, that means Star was essentially a 900-pound toddler in the middle of a growth spurt. His bones weren't even fully fused yet, and his brain was a chaotic mix of, "I'm scared of that leaf," and "Is it nap time?" Asking a horse that young to gallop 40 miles through a storm is like asking a middle schooler to carry a full-grown man through an Olympic marathon in a hurricane. Most horses that age would have bucked, bolted, or just sat down and quit. But Star didn't. They were navigating dirt paths that had turned into soup with zero visibility. And it wasn't just the mud. These woods were crawling with pro-British marauders and loyalist bandits who essentially treated the revolution like a purge night. They were out there looking for easy targets to rob, kidnap, or worse. A lone teenage girl on a valuable horse was basically a walking jackpot for them. Sybil knew this, and she rode right through their backyard anyway. But here's the kicker. You'd think a 40-mile sprint through bandit territory would be enough of a challenge. But Sybil wasn't just riding for her health. She was basically a one-woman recruitment agency. She didn't have a fancy lantern system or a squad of messengers to help. Every time she reached a farmhouse, she had to make enough noise to wake the dead, but without getting caught by a British patrol. She'd lean off Star, who, by the way, is doing the heavy lifting of a literal tank at this point, and use a long stick to bang on the shutters. Imagine being a sleepy farmer, tucked into bed, and suddenly hearing a thundering whack, whack, whack on your window. And she wasn't just shouting, "The British are coming," she was specific. She was authoritative. She was telling grown men exactly where to muster, what supplies to bring, and how much time they had before Danbury became a memory. She was essentially the 18th century version of an emergency broadcast system, but with better hair. By the time she finally turned back toward home, her clothes were heavy with rain, her horse was nearing total collapse, and she had successfully raised an army of 400 men while the rest of the world was hitting the snooze button. Rallying an army from your backyard is a vibe, but wait until you hear who actually showed up to thank her later. It's the ultimate historical flex. By the time the sun started peeking over the horizon, Sybil was back at the Ludington farm. She was soaked to the bone, shivering, and probably wondering if anyone would actually show up. But then, one by one, Then dozen by dozen, the militia she'd summoned came marching in. These men didn't just show up to talk, they were ready for blood. Because of her, they were able to march toward the Battle of Ridgefield and give the British a very rude awakening. Imagine the scene. General William Tryon and his British regulars, who thought they were just out for a quick arson trip, suddenly found themselves in a meat grinder. They engaged in a brutal, house-to-house street fighting crawl. Because Sybil moved so fast, the British didn't have time to organize a clean exit. They were forced into a panicked retreat toward the coast, constantly being picked off by the very farmers Sybil had woken up just hours before. So, she saved the militia, she outrode Revere, and she turned a British victory into a total disaster. And the best part? Word of her midnight marathon reached the very top of the food chain. We're talking the big boss himself, George Washington. The general didn't just send a thank you card or an appreciative carrier pigeon. He actually showed up at the Ludington house to personally thank her. Imagine being 16 and having the literal father of the country standing in your living room because you out-hustled his entire scout team. Alexander Hamilton was there too, probably leaning against the doorframe taking mental notes for a rap battle he wouldn't invent for another 200 years. He knew a main character moment when he saw one. So, if the literal president thinks you're a legend, how did we manage to forget her for over a century? Well, it's no secret that the heroes of our history books are basically in one giant boys-only club where you need a fancy mustache and a three-piece suit to be worthy of mention. Sybil was just the girl who rode, which apparently didn't fit the founding fathers' aesthetic the historians were trying to curate. They wanted their patriots to be stoic men in powdered wigs, not a rain-soaked teenager who was better at their job than they were. Then came the final nail in the coffin, the Henry Wadsworth Longfellow factor. In 1860, Longfellow wrote The Midnight Ride of Paul Revere. It was catchy, it had a great rhythm, and it was, historically speaking, basically fan fiction. He skipped over the part where Revere got captured, completely ignored the other riders, and became a viral hit. And unfortunately for Sybil, nobody wrote a bop about a teenage girl in New York, so her heroic trek stayed buried in family journals while Revere's 12-mile trot became a national holiday. But wait, what happened to the horse? Because Star deserves a trophy too. While most modern horses need a specialized diet and a massage after a light jog, Star was so physically spent he could barely stand for days. And while we don't have his retirement records, we like to imagine he spent the rest of his life in the Ludington's best pasture, never having to look at a rain cloud or a British soldier ever again. Sybil and Star were a duo that redefined ride or die, and honestly, they earned the right to never work another day in their lives again. But for Sybil, that legendary night was just proof of how she was wired. She didn't get a pension or a parade for saving the town. Instead, Sybil went on to run a tavern and become a successful businesswoman in a time when women were legally considered property adjacent. She lived until she was 77, watching the country she helped save grow up around her, likely knowing the whole time that she was one of the main reasons it was there at all. It took until 1961, over 100 years after her death, for her to finally get a statue in Carmel, New York. And then in 1975, the US Postal Service finally gave her the 18th century equivalent of a verified checkmark, her own stamp. So, why are we still talking about Revere? It's the ultimate PR scandal. The guy rode 12 to 16 miles in clear weather with two others helping him, and he still got captured halfway through. But history isn't just what happened, it's who told the story. And for a long time, the storytellers forgot to mention the girl who rode solo 40 miles in a thunderstorm while successfully avoiding capture and summoning 400 soldiers. So, the next time you feel like a task is too big or the weather is too bad, just remember Sybil. She didn't have GPS, a map, or even a light. She just had a stick and a horse. So, who thinks Sybil deserves a big-budget Hollywood movie? Honestly, I'm waiting for the trailer.